Okay, so we talked earlier today about different forces of evolution and how you can go from one species to several different species.
당고라 단다 먼저 페유르기 강라 슈겐 카리 티게 메디강라 도라스 안 단다 니릭 찍니 니릭 민도 로가 차야디 거시레스.
And we've mentioned before that we think humans have relatives with living species, and we thought it would be nice if today we talked about the evolution of humans and some of the species that we came from.
dilladita thande nganzo thande cha khari tayar lana draw mi rijora di pelgu rodang diche.
So here, Thomas Huxley was one of the first people to really put forward to the world the idea that humans are related to some of the other species that we see.
The Thomas Huxley lashta Koran thangbo chagi resdi mi ladu gala ani nirik shemba da nyeu cha de lajura di shenge thangbo di Thomas Huxley la Koran res.
Darwin believed that too, and he thought that too when he first published the idea of evolution, but he kept it out of his first book because he thought it might be too controversial.
The Darwin Koran ge samlo tharan khe res Koran thep thye kapsu ine di khaila na nyota ro yungir samne ni ko gi thanda lamsan tam yoma res thep dina nya de res samsudi.
So it took him a long time before he published a second book about the evolution of man.
Diladu ani mi gi thanda phelgyu rodan jura di gala an Koran gi thep nyo di tamela ti score res.
But when you look at just the skeletons of humans and gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, gibbons, it's easy to see some similarities.
Tangaran sui thanda rum tawainas di mi che an thana shi gorilla di che simje ani chimpanzee ani orangutan la thanda simje ji che ani gibbon la ni Quran zo tawai dinang lo la chungbe cha doas tau chag doas tinjo.
And scientists have been very interested in figuring out the history of our own species evolution. So they've been looking at related species, but perhaps more importantly, looking at fossil evidence.
Diladu tangaran sui dini ma khari tagi urlana mi da nyeri dawe nyewe khari chagi dus tagi ures an keje shuji khari chadi urlana anzu gyurdol tani shingi ures.
Okay, so let me take you back to about 55 million years ago.
Ta khiran sola ma khol ti drain lana Losel
we think that's when primates first evolved, which is where we came from.
Ta thangbo thorim socha era deni ni thangshwe ro di khande jur lawana dende ro jur lan shigi res.
Next one. We think that about 8 million years ago we split off from gorillas and the great apes. And about 6 million years ago, we split off from chimpanzees.
Diladu lo saya ges khongla ani nganzo gorilla da yo che res ra loga cha de yo che an dini ni lo saya trus ngoila ani chimpanzee da mini loga tro di shi res dini yo che.
So chimpanzees are our closest living relative on earth.
Diladu ta mi ro mi ri la cha sha na nyesho di khari chagi urla na chimpanzee di cha de res.
But we've been evolving separately for about 6 million years.
Taniga nyeri loga charo di chaya di khadu go churlana lo saya tru khongla go chures.
We think about the time that we split off. There was a species that was able to walk on 2 legs, and it lived in the jungle.
Ni yo cher lara lo nyeri ni la di ma nyewa ma jingwe la mebo ji gyora di gapsa khande lana dinde ro jures and di kangba ni che ni khomba chuni dunge ri jires.
And the species was called Auroran tugenesis. Auroran tugenesis is what we called it.
Di mingla Auroran tugenesis la ming ta she res di rigdela.
During this presentation, I'll show pictures of what these species look like. We obviously don't have pictures, so we don't know what they looked like. But scientists, this is what we predict they might look like.
Ta khande me ngone par dida yo mare te ngoma sai mangbung ke shi resra dilo dan seri ba denjo khande yor lan ngomba chho na dinde jo reslan and dinjo par dinjo te shi res.
Scientists are able to tell from the structure of skull bones how large eyebrows would be, how far noses would stick out, how tall and how upright an animal would stand.
Tanashi yal rongbo langwe kapsu khagas langgu yume do da ani mikpu khande yume da nagu ruba di khagas ta dong ni gyang rilu khaga sume di sangma cheri bai ta chi chigyo res.
So recreations of this species and others that I'll show are artists' depictions based on scientific evidence.
Ta tanda cheri gi pangda ragyo dila shi shani ani Quran su gi rimu na ma tön shagyo cha de res dige.
The ability to stand up freed those animals to use their hands for tools.
Quran su ya lang che kaptu kangpani ga lang tu go res thane shi lakpa den ju gi lakcha den ju phejo chi tungen chi res den ju.
About 4 million years ago, we believe that the species moved out of the jungle into the more open plains.
Ta losa shi smola ani nyerik dige ani shingna ni thone ani sagala thone go chugre lan shi yo res.
So here's a diagram that captures a lot of information. This is 2 million years ago, going up to the present.
Ta di parji do di nanglo la ni su mangbu ju du she res. Sai ni khong ne chinen thande bar gi ne dang tung yo res.
Up this way, this represents Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas.
Ta thanda di tigrish do di nala ni dish do di khari chungyo la na Europe chungyo res. Di Africa chungyo res. And di Asia chungyo res. Ani di ari chungyo res.
And here you can see different species of organisms that we believe lived throughout this time.
Dila du tuzo dila cha shani ta dige tanda nyerik dige yore la jora tuzo dil tani la res.
The second word is indicating that it's a species. So the first word, homo, we're all sharing, but the second word is the different species.
Ta dinal ta na yigi ni doas ra chigro ni thungu da homo la ni chig doas an wala ni bo ji doas homo la dinga ras sangma chig ba cha de res khaga khari cha de la na nyerik di loga cha de du ming ni wo di loga cha de do di nyerik di chungu res mi draw mi rig di thangbo go chu sa Africa ni go chu an dene ni tham draw chi de res.
And you can also see the species that we scientists believe we have evolved from, as well as some species related to us that have gone extinct.
Dila du ta nyerik dige ni ngara so pheju draw chi de res ti thigrinal an dena nyerik khashish khari de la na di ro cha sha na chadong ro sa gyo de res dina.
So it is about 2 million years ago when the relatives, the Homo genus, evolved.
Ta lo sai ni skon la sho na thanda nga ju gyu homo la jora di en pelgyur che go chu watung res.
And at that time, we think they began to use tools and that they began to eat more meat, which gave more nutrients, allowing us to grow larger brains.
Dila di thuzo gap su khari la na Quran zo nyerik dige lakcha den zo pheju che an sha sa go chu wa shi res sha sa la na chu manga ra ras chu manga edu gala leba da den zo cheru du res yerge du res.
About 1.5 years ago, somewhere around here, we believe that the Homo genus learned how to became hunter-gatherers, that they were able to gather some of their own food and hunt some food as well.
Ta lo sai chik da chagas khongi ta nyerik chi ta ra di ta wai na Quran su gi ta thangbo rida ya go chu ya jora di go chu la res.
Throughout this time, brains are increasing in size and about, go ahead.
Dini ya rodu gala ani lebe gi cheji jora ya phargi yo di te res.
About 600,000 years ago, around here, brains are fairly similar in size to our current size.
Ta lo tongda tugyas ngoi la cha shawai nas ani lebe gi cheze ta na thande mi gi cheze da do cha dio shi res.
And you can see in the artist depiction it's beginning to look more like human and less like an ape.
Ta di thuju gi nyerik jora di ta oina ta di parna ta oidu gala draw mi da nya chag do as do ji cha dio res.
About 500,000 years ago, around here, we think that our species started living in huts, very simple homes.
Na bumnga sngula ta oina mi din zo thangbo nyerik din zo thangbo khari go chu la oina chahang den de suini de ra den de go chu wa shi res.
About 400,000 years ago, around here, we see evidence that they had sophisticated stone tools like spears to hunt with.
dilladita bum shis ngo la ta oina quran su gita lajai peju chidu lajai din su yarge tangyo se no ayo yo do da dinde ri ni res.
And around here at 200,000, 250,000, we see the first Homo sapiens, the first of our species.
Ani lo bum ni the chagas kon la ta oina ani thangbo go chu la na ngara su draw mi rik jore di go chu res pejur chadi.
We think that about 170,000 years ago lived a woman who is the ancestor of all of us.
The bum chik da ani thi duins kon la ni ngara su mebo chi res di ani kemenji phumeji res la ni shi res.
Scientists can track that because in our cells we have mitochondria. Have you heard of mitochondria before?
Nusuk thadul la jua nuba tungi gi thanda thasuk jua di khiran zo ha gu yesa mitochondria le thabung nal wang tha mangbu yo wang ta chikla nuge thadul le yo di shingi yesa. Yes.
So mitochondria actually have a little bit of their own DNA.
Ta thanda nuge thadul rig judo di wang tha ro di nanglo khoran chu nanglo la wang tha di nanglo khari yor la waina DNA yo res.
So that DNA is passed from mother through the egg to the children, and it does not come at all from the father.
Diladu thanda ngaju nuge thadul nal DNA jora di mani chungsha jo res and di DNA di marang ni res phani chungyo DNA ji ma res nuge thadul na yo DNA di.
So looking at the mitochondrial DNA of people today, we can track back in time through the female lineage, and we believe that it was about 170,000 years ago when we had the last ancestor of all of us.
Diladu phume gi chi gel chi inde sin ma then ta ona mebo thangbo jora di ma thedu kala ni bum chik da ni thi duins khon la yo chi tende ni yo res.
Okay, next slide. Somewhere in here, about 150,000 to 50,000 years ago, we really developed. We began making jewelry and decorating ourselves. We developed complex language and communication. We began to trade one village to another, and we began to bury our dead, signifying that we believed in something beyond just the body.
Diladu bum chik da chagas ngon ra di ke shedu kala mi pha chu pinsu dewa che jora dide go chu che an thang na shi thong sa we jela ani ruba din ju sa wala be jora subu din ju phungbu din ju be di sangma ani go chu res.
You can see in that time frame that we were not the only species within our genus alive. There are Homo sapiens and also Homo Neanderthal.
Ta ngaran su gi thanda gyu chik ba enjoy ra homo la di cha shaina ngaran su chik bu mares draw mi di chik bu mares Homo sapiens la no draw mi chagyo res di mai ba Homo Neanderthals la di res.
Scientists have wondered how much Homo sapiens and Homo Neanderthals talked to each other and interacted, and wondered if we even interbred sometimes.
Ta thanda cheri ba din jo khora jo samlo na chi kharli yor la na ta thanda draw mi rek da dil nyewe Homo Neanderthals la da dinye para phinju deo chung yonas khora jo pha jo ke je she da din de chung shere chung yonas thana shi pha jo phinju the yonas le de yonas la jora ringi di ne cheri ba jo tholi yor resti.
We think that around 70,000 years ago, there was a massive volcano that created so much smoke, it blocked out a lot of the sunlight and made it difficult for the organisms living to find enough food.
Ani loti duins ngola ani thanda meriji thor resra chures di kenge ani semje kengwe mangchala ani susugi sera khaku chawa roji cha res ne da digapso.
So much smoke would also block a lot of sunlight and make it very cold.
Thana shi digi ani thanda nime yo jora di ka ne ani saja di thangmo shu cha res thidu.
And we think that that might be why the Neanderthals went extinct.
Cheza an digi kenge ani thanda Neanderthals di meo cha re chadong chire la di digi lagi res.
We also think that it caused our species to go through a bottleneck where we went from a large population to a very small population that then went on to repopulate the earth.
Ngoni shona shi thanda shedam gi pechun sha sa ni chogdina la imbor mangbu yo che jela nyu chai di ro ngara zo draw mi la de chung gi res de go shi su chi gi res.
So these are some of the species that are not alive today, but that we believe once were alive based on fossil evidence.
Ta thanda denzo ta oina dige rig di thanda yorela na samlinga ni yo mare sine ngaran su idinte ji yorela ni gyurdol tani lagi yores.
You can see from farthest back in time, the brains were smaller. This is us, Homo sapiens, than they were today. But moving forward, the brains got bigger, and the Neanderthals were very much like humans.
Ta thanda dine ma draw ina di lebe ge cheze di res thangbo chunju chani di thengdu mi ga ji res draw mi di chimbu chdoas ina di Neanderthal nyam to ta oina chejung draw ro cha de res.
We're not quite sure why our species survived while the Neanderthals went extinct. They seem to have been better built to handle the cold. They're a little bulkier. They have a larger brain, so we think they were quite smart.
Tanganzu thanda di tadu gal draw mil ha ra shamba di cha dong chin ras di ha gu yo mares dus tadu zamba thanda leba cheze draw do je khoran zo leba chimbu yo che thana shi subula ta ina khoran zo ishane din zo yaga top che do thong yo res.
One theory is that scientists believe a region in our brain involved in social connections was more advanced than the Neanderthals, and that so when there was a catastrophe, we were more able to rely on helping each other to survive.
Ta cheriba ji subu top da dindil ta ina phajo di yaga thong yo res ra ine ta cheriba din zo khari shigir la ina chizo na phenju de chidang jo ra di ani thanda draw mi di yaga yo chang khoran su chune chi tu re la jo ra di shigir res.
I think I also read Neanderthals were very suited for a forest and for hunting in a thick forest. And when this event occurred, it was more open and plains, and that was more the Homo sapiens environment.
Dila du chik kharish khoslana thanda Neanderthals la rig jida Quran ji indu gala Quran zo shingna la de ga che an thana shirida gya khyo yores ina di chungwa ji chung la sa meri chure di yo gap so ani saja di tis tongba do cha indi chirlani khosons.
Here are some skulls that have been collected from the different species. And here's us, humans. You can see the skull getting bigger to allow for a larger brain over time.
Ta di thanda nyeri mindra din ju gi en kapali din ju resra dinal ta du gala khiran ju ib din ju ta wana kapali di cheru du yo thongu das kapali che la du gala leba ya manga leba che yo tingu yo ras.
And here would be the entire body of a Neanderthal compared to a modern human.
Ta thanda Neanderthal yora rigdi digi rum ro din ro jo res subudil tana ani draw mi thanda thingdu gi mi di res.
As you can see, not so different. We think that every once in a while, scientists wondered, did Neanderthals and humans have a baby together?
Ta dusta du kheba shira min do astini dila du cheriba din jo khari samgu la na dini nyam do deni pugu chung yo na la di thwa dili yo res kranjala.
It's still very controversial, but when scientists look at the DNA of humans and when they look at DNA gathered from the bones of fossilized Neanderthals, they do see a little bit of what looks like Neanderthal DNA.
Ta thanda gurdu nal tayra di tadu gala ani thanda DNA di tadu gala Quran so khari ro thon lana Neanderthal ki DNA doj thon restina.
Here is a mummy that was found, and it's believed to be 5,000 years old. And scientists found it and collected DNA from it and looked at the DNA sequence.
Ta thanda phungbo den jo tumni shagda nyarsa chedi dindel mami la ora dina tadu gala Quran so ge di nanglo la DNA din sta res and din jo lo khajur lana ningle longa dong khons ka ji cha de res.
And they found that it was really Homo sapien, indicating that the Neanderthals had gone extinct by then, but we still see traces of Neanderthal DNA.
In this, okay. Ta di thanda rigze thanda DNA la tai ras di draw me DNA nye res dinala. Dila do Neanderthal rig dida chadong chin sa tyung res ine Quran su DNA na la thanda Neanderthal ki DNA this chi yo ji nye res.
So that is a very brief history of what scientists think happened on the evolutionary path from apes to humans.
Dila do ta tamini chine thanda draw me jora di badu ani thanda figure dang jora di cheri bai dosol den ro ji cha de res.
Don't think that you descended from a chimpanzee or a gorilla. It's just the chimpanzee is our closest relation outside of our species, and so on. We came from a common ancestor. We didn't come from chimpanzees.
The Kiranzu Samlo na Shagwe Kechumbu Chagores, Tanganzo New Ladugal Neri Chikba Mares, Manzo Mebuchik Chagurina, New Chat that Tandita Dugal Neri Loga Logache, New Chadurmashi, Manzo Chimpanzee Chungare and Dishigu Mares Pelgu Dugal, Mebuchik Chadures, and Yeshuta and a chimpanzee the mid and Yeshu Chadures.
This guy, the Iceman, was found because of global warming. The glacier that he had been buried under had melted, and there he was on the rocks in the mountains.
Ale thanda the Iceman lan phumbosh nye do di thanda tum shajon de mars Quran di khande nyer law ena thanda khawrum gya shajo rigal di yo res phumbo di an thanda khola chajur chani shudura di shueking ani di phumbo di nye res.
I think he had some cloth and some tools. I mean, they could find out a lot because of him.
Ale di nyam do tuglor da ani thana shi lagja ende ya nye res.
Okay, so we've learned about how species, through the process of evolution or bottlenecks or whatnot, are able to change their allele frequencies and evolve over time.
Dila du thande drodan di khari tungi urla na pheju nanglo nyeri din so khande jor dugu me di ten res.
We've also just looked at our own species history and seen that we evolved relatively recently and that there were many other species like us that we came from or diverged from and split into two species.
Dila du thanda ngara zo draw mi mai ba thanda nyerik shimba ende thanda mebo chik ne ya ma tham de jo dinde ya mangbush phon ras.
So we thought it would be fun if we had a debate about whether we are if we are still evolving. If we are still evolving, will we evolve as one species or will we split into more than one species?
Ta thanda nganzo drawling chigos di khar lana thiwa di khar chayur lana ngara zo draw mi di pelgu dugu yo res lan thiwa dis. And dugu yo ena ni nyeri thanda tharan chik ran digure yana nyeri ni sawal ni lu dugu res lan di thiwa is.
Keep in mind the things Megan discussed this morning about what drives new species to come up.
Dila do en kiranzo Megan ge shoge kiranzo tiswas pelgyur chunga la chagi di changu gurlan di shugin khari khari tigi major di samlo na shagu res.
And also think about what pressures we might be under and what that might select for, and what, if we are still evolving, what that might look like in our future.
Amma banne shu khari khari le sigres digi kenge en nganzo pelgyur khari dro sigres la di samaya samlo na sharo ches.
So shall we have a debate as one large group or in small groups?
Ani ruka chimbu ni suge yana ruka chunju suge sa drawling chela. Chunju small groups.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get in small groups and start debating the future of humans.
Ta maung be mi khande yongure la jara digal ani drawling dikhiran zo nangro ches ko uzu nangro ches. Ruka chunju.
We could get one or two people from each group to summarize what they said.
Ta ruga re na la mi ta khaju yo ena ra an mi chik ni jijala ya shani ani kiran zu ruga samju khari me dijala shiro ches
ranju dimru se rije shugyun je sarde shugyun bumke rije photo rije dimrus sade du na me ani kare kin se ju chikam jo ha da tukuna ne de tu do de tu gina ne kare kin se ju kuran chung do sondo bugin ya lenge sho da ni lendilati Sarchi
Apologists do about cheating, and I mean, they make these little money paradigms or paradigms whether we should share right now or if I can hold out.
Right.
I wonder how one of those will go over.
I don't know. That would be a fun experiment. All right, should we stop them? 240? All right, are you all ready to share some of your thoughts with the class?
kiran zo thodur nang sa jo dita jingzida la ma she gi thari yo es sonsta
So maybe we could have somebody from each group come up and tell us what your group was discussing, what you think might happen to humans, or just what you were arguing about.
ta kiran zo roga re ne kusab chik chik phe ni ro an shero chista 근데 마음 바 펠규 중앙에나 한데 수열라니
There's no right answer here.
तदिनला लेन दि दिवरेलानी ला यो मारेस
Anybody have an idea they want to share with the group?
ओ त किराजो समसु शेंदे यो एसा थदि यो ओके
다 나서 루가니